Good afternoon. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Mr. Arun Myra on our platform. Mr. Arun Myra is a thought leader and author, as you can see from his headline, but he's also a management consultant and a former member of the Planning Commission of India. He is also former India chairman of Boston Consulting Group and the author of the book that we are here to talk about today, The Solution Factories, How the Leaders of Tata Became Nation Builders. He's also—
One second, I want to just correct you. The Solutions Factory, the subtitle is A Consultant's Handbook for Problem Solving.
You are right.
According to my previous book, which was a good one too, I thought,
which I
about the Learning Factory, how the leaders of Tata became nation builders. So there are two books here, the Learning Factory and the Solutions Factory.
The Solutions Factory, a consultant's handbook for problem solving. As you know, he worked with the Tatas and then he became a consultant.
My apologies. In fact, actually, there's more than 10 books that Mr. Myra has written, and you can just go on Amazon. This one is a Solution Factory, not the learning.
It's about learning. It's about learning too. So you're quite right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and correcting me. And before we start, I just want to ask you, how have the last 18 months been for you, both personally and professionally?
Actually, the last 18 months have been probably some of the best months in my life. And that's surprising as people say that they suffered so much during the lockdown, that they felt so isolated and depressed. I found that I had now a gift of time. And time is something that, you can't create. But here, circumstances created time. Time to do what? Time to read more, time to reflect a lot more, and time to, surprisingly, connect much more. Because during this time, people were compelled to get onto Zooms and webinars. I found that I was, in a day, meeting more people than I was doing within 3 or 4 months in so-called real life. Everyone had to, set up meetings and then travel to them, and then a few people could come. So the number of people that one listened to and had deliberations with multiplied by almost an order of magnitude for me. And my days became so full and rich also because of meeting a variety of people that I would not have met before. And I would say here, younger people and people who live in poorer circumstances and who wouldn't be usually invited into those discussions in the hotels and conference rooms that one would go to when there wasn't a lockdown, they were now part of the conversation. So I got to really listen to, I was going to say India and listen to the world.
Okay, Mr. Myra, thank you for articulating what has happened in the last 18 months with you so beautifully. Of course, it's been a mixed bag. There's been loss of lives and livelihoods. We talked about it in the last time we interacted with you on the Tata's book. Now, this book is about consulting. Its book is how to get the maximum out of consultants. It's about solutions. And first of all, let me ask you, why this book, The Solutions Factory, why now? And why do you call it a consultant's handbook for problem solving?
Yeah, actually, the title and the subtitle are both chosen by the publisher because they like the title and subtitle to be sort of catchy. So Solutions Factory sounds a good title. However, it's a very appropriate title for what the book is about. It's about consultants. It's about the profession of consulting. And why did I write the book? I have been asked during the pandemic itself, and even before, by many young people who do very well in life and are sort of finishing college and saying, I want to join a consulting company, and you've been in a consulting company, and they're not asking me to recommend them, but what do you think about it? Or some, of course, want me to recommend them, but what do you think about it? So I ask them, what do you want to do in life? And I find quite often they're struggling. So they got an idea that consulting is a glamorous profession, that when they get into consulting, they'll, of course, earn higher money, more money, especially if they got to BCG or McKinsey or consulting companies like that, then they might, if they got into, let me say, a real world, a corporate world, or even more importantly, if they were to get into the social change world. where neither the glamour nor the money is there compared to the corporate world. And amongst the corporate world, the consultants are the glamour guys, as it were. So I'd ask them, what do you really want to get? And they would then, find those conversations very useful. At the same time, they would also want to know that if they were to become a consultant, how could they be a more effective consultant? So my book is a book explaining my perspective on what consulting is about and what good consulting is about, and therefore people to think about it before they jump into consulting.
Thank you, Mr. Myra. Of course, the times have changed, and the consulting firms have themselves tried to reimagine themselves in a new world, and we'll come to that. But I want to now jump into the book, and I'm sure Vasudha will ask you. In the book, you define who's a consultant to set the expectations right? Now, I remember being in India in 1994, and I was the president of the Management Consulting Club. I don't know if you remember him or not. He was a professor of ours. He used to teach us accounting, but he was part of the IMCI, Institute of Management Consultants of India. In fact, I even attended a meeting in 95, if I'm not wrong, with him. And Dr. Sridhar Raghavan, Professor Dr. Sridhar Raghavan, is now in heaven. And, and I asked him one day about consultants. So he told me that consultants are people, when you ask them the time, they look at your watch, tell you the time, and take the watch away. And they said consultants are people who con and insult. But you have a very different definition in the book. So why don't you tell us the serious definition, which comes from personal experience, or not just being a consultant, but also being the chairman of such a large and venerable management consulting practice. So, and how has the consulting role changed over the years?
Yeah, I think the sentence that you used is going to help me greatly to explain what I want to say. A consultant is someone who borrows your watch to tell you the time and then takes your watch away. Let's look at both parts of that sentence. The first is a consultant borrows your watch to tell you the time. I have realized that most organizations and their leaders know what they need to know, but they don't know it. They know what they need to know, but they don't know it. In other words, the data and the insights are within them, but only someone from the outside who looks at that watch, let me call it a watch, says, hey, this is what is going on. This is what is going on. So in that sense, yes, the consultant is borrowing your data, borrowing your information to then interpret it for you and say, this is the truth right now. So that's a very valuable service that a consultant provides. But the question comes, why does a consultant need to do this? Why is it that the organizations themselves can't read their own watch and tell themselves what is the time, what is the truth? So we'll come to that. That's where the art of consulting comes. The second part of your sentence is also very important, where you say, and then they take away your watch. And this is why I'm concerned about the profession of consulting as a profession, which is any profession seems to be that you must make money for yourself out of it. So what they do is they make you feel that you are no good at being able to understand yourself, and you're going to need me again and again to help you on your journey. So large consulting companies develop what they call long-term relationships with clients, means the same company keeps asking you again and again. Quite often it's even the same question, but other questions. In other words, the client organization hasn't been helped by the consultant to learn more effectively, to learn to read signals outside itself and within itself more effectively, and thus becomes dependent on the consultant and pays the consultant money. To use the analogy of doctors, medical doctors, I mean, I go to a medical doctor so the doctor understands me very well because, he's objective and he's professional and could tell me many things or the one or two things going wrong in my body. And then when he helps me, I want him to help me in a way that I don't need to see any doctor again. But doctors who don't make you well enough to be able to look after yourself are good in that sense from his profession, that you keep going back to the same doctor. I trust him, and you pay more and more, and you're back with the medical profession, getting all sorts of different tests and going to all different specialties, like in a big hospital. So big consulting companies do have, many specialists in different things, and you keep getting referred within the consulting company to other specialists. So they've just deprived you of your ability to stand on your own feet and to look after yourself.
Absolutely. And later on the book, you talk about, consultants being coaches, being facilitators, and we'll come to, and Vasudha will ask you that question. But I want to ask you a question which is larger than your book. Now, management consultants have been, and management consultant firms, of course, in the book you talk about when management consulting becomes a business, and we'll come to that, and Vasudha will come to that. But you talk about the fact that there are things that money can't buy, right? You have to be coachable, if I can use it, analogy. But right now there is a debate, and there was even in the parliament, it was tabled or was about to be tabled. There was some discussion to ban foreign management consulting firms from India. While they're very prevalent and they work with state governments, they work with ministries. I mean, you talk of McKinsey, BCG, Bain and Company, A.T. Carney is just called Carney now, right? And then there are many specialist ones. There's Roland Berger, or there's Arthur D. Little, and then I can tell you there are many others. And they've made a contribution. But sometimes the Indian consultants who used to work for these foreign management consulting companies have now started their own internal Indian management consulting firms, and they are propagating this notion of getting them banned. Do you see this? What is your commentary on this thought process of banning? I don't think it'll happen soon or happen in a hurry. I can't say it won't happen ever. But what's your point of view?
Well, I've got some experience with this. I didn't know that at the moment, as you say, that
there's some discussion on,
all right,
among very prominent MPs.
Right. When I came back to India after my 10 years of being a consultant internationally, operating out of the USA, but consulting with companies in Europe and in South America and even in Asia, from the USA at that time, I came back to India itself and to help with BCG's growth in India. And I was sort of called the chairman of their new practice in India. And this was when the UPA came into power in 2004, if you remember, after the India Shining experience of the NDA government, that, the NDA sort of had said that we can make India a very attractive investment destination for foreign investors, and to tell them the story of India, that India is now, shining, markets are booming, and it's a lovely place to come and put your money and make more money. There was a reaction to that from the population and the voters, and the BJP got a shock that they expected to be, brought back with a larger margin. But on the other hand, they lost the election, and the UPA came back with the support of, within this UPA, the Congress is supported by the left parties. And they were very instrumental in enabling the Congress to win and the BJP to lose. And the view of the left parties, as well as I would say a large part of the socialist wing within Congress, was that, look, the people of India haven't been benefiting from this new paradigm of growth since the 1991, where you open yourself to foreign investment and foreign ideas, and foreign companies can come and they can appoint their CEOs of their choice or bring their own CEOs in from abroad. And so, yes, we are connecting with the world and the world of modern ideas, but the people of India weren't benefiting. The stock markets were booming, no question about it. And India during that time was attracting more FDI than it had before. But were the people of India benefiting or not? And so this was the mood in which the UPA came to power, with Dr. Manmohan Singh, the author of the first financial reforms to sort of liberate India from the socialist ideas, to make it more capitalist and more open to foreign trade and foreign investments. And so within the Congress party itself and the UPA, there was Dr. Manmohan Singh and there was Monte Ahluwalia, who was a Western trained, very eminent economist who was made the deputy chairman of the planning commission with the prime minister chaired himself. And so they said, we must get, and why not? We must get, modern ideas from elsewhere in the world and to help the development of our country. So they invited senior people from the various consulting companies who were already in India at the time. You named almost all of them at the time. So one person from each, as it was, depending on that person's knowledge and speciality, to be an advisor within, a member of some of the committees that they had created to review the progress of the previous plan that was underway. So I happened to be invited to be on the committee for medium and small scale industries, which is a subject that is very close to me because I believe they are the solution for India's growth and employment problems. So I was invited to be a member of that committee. And others were, people from maybe McKinsey on the financial reforms committee and someone on infrastructure reforms, etc. But I didn't realize that, I was so happy that someone had asked me what maybe ideas for the country. Of course, I'd grown up in India, worked in industry in India, and been out in consulting abroad for just 10 years. So my experience and my roots were all Indian, but I came in with ideas which might be relevant and useful for India. So I was very pleased with all this. But as soon as we met, the first meeting, I came out of it, the media was all over me and saying, aren't you going to resign? So I said, why would I want to resign when I've been invited to serve the country? So unless the Prime Minister himself or Dr. Ahluwalia were to say, no, we don't want you anymore because you haven't done a good job. I just started, so I don't know why I should resign. Then they mentioned that the left parties have made a whole hullabaloo about this, that India is selling itself to foreigners. And see, we always suspected that there were these so-called reformers and they would just sell India off to the foreigners. And so they've invited these foreign consultants. And it is true, all the people who were invited, including myself, though we might have been Indians, we were working for large foreign consulting companies, or happened to be also US-based companies at that time. So here the US is taking over India is what the left parties were saying. So the question from the media was, what are you going to do about it? Right? Now, I was invited then to a debate on Big Fight by Rajdeep Sardesai, who was started this show called The Big Fight for NDTV at the time, and a debate in which myself, I, and another person who was a left-leaning sort of economist were invited, as well as a right-leaning economist. And Mr. Bardhan, who was the General Secretary of the Communist Party, was also invited. So it was like 2 against 2. There was a left-leaning economist, supposedly, along with Mr. Bardhan, and me as a sort of a right-wing foreign guy, along with this foreign-educated economist, supposedly on the other side. But it became a debate discussion between Mr. Bardhan and myself, because he posed this question. He said, isn't it wrong that our country with such a great tradition and so much knowledge within itself should become so helpless and dependent on foreigners? And he said, what worries me, he said, is that they have agendas of their own, and they've got ways of thinking which may be suitable for them, but they're not suitable for India and the people of India. Now, he had a point. He does have a point. But my point was, why do you suspect that I don't know what is good for the people of India and only you do? He said, no, I'm not doubting that, maybe, but your ideas are foreign ideas. I said to him, but you subscribe to the ideas of Karl Marx. He was not an Indian, and you continue to propagate his ideas being as the best ones for India. So let's open our minds to all ideas anywhere, but we have to first consider what our country's situation is and its people's needs are, which is what I guess you communist people want to do. But then you promptly bring a foreign idea as the solution, and now you're accusing me of also bringing a foreign idea solution. And I want to tell you, I'm not bringing any foreign ideas. Yes, that cannot be. If you serve anybody who pays you, you have to be talking their language, and he has truth in that. I mean, companies have brands and they want you to always say good things about their brands. Even if you're selling, soap or soft drinks, you have to keep saying that brand is the best and defend whatever they do. So I said, no, but in this case, I'm doing it in my personal capacity. But he asked this challenging question: how can you be innocent of what your company requires you to do? And so this is in my book, therefore, that you have to live true to your personal values and not be swayed away by, let me now use the word, the valuations of your firm.
Thank you so much for giving us a background and a real story. But I can say that it's not going to happen, because these firms are intrinsically involved with India's progress, at least for the last 3 decades, some for more than 4 decades. So it's not going to happen. They are led by Indians, and they've learned the framework from, every civilization, every country is good at something. I mean, there is a certain thought process these consulting firms bring. Now, let me ask you another question. Traditionally, consultants were more facilitators, as you talk, coaches. They were more about strategy. They were more about ideas. They were more about advice. In the last decade, I would say, apart from strategizing, giving the strategy, ideation, thought process, consulting, they've started to get involved with execution. That shift has happened at least in the last 8 to 10 years, I would say. What is your commentary on that?
Yeah, that comes back to this borrowing the watch to tell the time sort of story, and then keeping the watch. The foundation of McKinsey or the foundation of BCG, which was younger than McKinsey, or going back to the foundation of Arthur D. Little, and Arthur Little was founded more than 100 years ago. The foundation of all these firms are people, great thinkers who said, the production world, the business world, needs to get the benefit of academic good ideas, good research ideas. And what you do is you are to be a trusted advisor to the chief executive or the executives, a trusted advisor. The word was advisor. And a trusted advisor means that you put your own interests in the background. It's the interest of the person you're advising completely. You're looking squarely that person in the eye, into that person's heart. And whatever you say has to be in the interest of that person and is not going to help you, grow your career or your wealth thereafter, to do that. Now, how this has changed, okay? It is, well, every professional expects to get some good compensation for themselves. Surely, you pay a good doctor more money than the others. So, getting fees for your piece of advice, which you give by spending a few hours with your client, is a good thing. And the higher the client pays you, the more the client pays you, let me say per hour or per day, it's showing how valuable the client finds you as a person, as an advisor. But consulting companies don't make their money like that. They get into the business of implementation, like you said. Now, for implementation, you need to have armies of people to go implement. Now, implementation involves both things. It's going and looking at the data of the client organization, borrowing the many watches inside the organization, taking all that material, making them into slides and PowerPoint presentations, showing the watch back. So these the young people do. And so they do the hard work, on the ground. And the larger the team of young people that you have, the more is the surplus that is generated. And out of that surplus, the partners of the consulting company, they make their money. So to be a solo consultant and a good advisor is not a good business growth for your self strategy. You must grow the size of your firm, not by having more partners, because the distribution of the profits will, again, per partner, you'll get less. You must have a larger number of so-called implementers, these younger consultants who go and do, let me say, the hard work, the donkey work, from which the surplus was generated for the firm. So that's one side. But then came, when I was in the United States, that from Silicon Valley, many people got into making money out of ideas. So you got an idea, then you marketed the idea in the stock market, and a lot of investors came in because, my goodness, this is going to be the next great watch or the next great something or the other, and you put your money into it. So these persons were making money without even giving their time thereafter. They got an idea and they marketed the idea itself. So many consultant companies, partners themselves began to say, this is an easier way to make money. Here, in the way they are working, I've got to go give my time and sit and listen patiently, calmly to some CEO who's, showing himself off, but I've got to be nice, otherwise I don't get the business. This is painful work sometimes, and it's hard work also. Why don't we make money out of our ideas? In other words, market our ideas, package them, market them, or take other people's ideas and help develop business models around them, and we become investors in those, right? So obviously, you can make more money out of money. This is where financialization of the economy is gone. The people who make the most money in the world today are the people who are making money out of money. Their money is not invested in creating real organizations on the ground, small enterprises, which it's a struggle to get profits out of them. You make money out of some shares, you sell them very quickly and put them into other shares, and you go on in this whole way. So this was then the method of making more money, which the consultants also said, why can't we be participants in that? Now, when you're in that, your motivations become quite different to the motivations of a trusted advisor. And this is what I began to see, the deterioration, if I can use the word, of values within the consulting profession.
Thank you, Mr. Myra, for being so candid. And of course, I would say Mr. Myra doesn't really need an introduction in India. He was a member of the Planning Commission. He was invited. And I wouldn't call him just a thought leader, an author, or somebody who had a corporate life. But I would say he's a true nation builder, because whether it was the Tatas, whether it was BCG, whether it's the Planning Commission, whether through his books now, he's contributing to the process of nation building. Let us come back to the book, The Solutions Factory, and I'll get Vasudha to ask the next set of questions. Vasudha, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Batra, and thank you, Mr. Myra, for coming on this platform. I'm not going to, when I read the book title, when it said, Consultant's Handbook, everything you just described right now, talking about consultancy and how firms work and how they have deteriorated in values, that is what I was expecting to kind of read about when I entered the book. But for anyone who's watching, that's not what this book is about. It is actually very personal. It's your personal stories, your personal lessons, and they have been so well organized and spread out through the book that, in fact, after the first two stories, I needed to take a walk. I know you also have a story in there about taking a walk. So when I was reading that, I was like, I did that. So I actually feel like this book can be really read by anyone. And I know you said that it's the publishers who say that, who decide the book title and the subheadings. But I want to ask you, who were you targeting this book towards? Is it like, were you on board with just calling it a consultant's handbook, or were you hoping to reach out to a larger audience?
That's the important question. And Vasudha, firstly, I must say that you seem to have read the book and really understood it. Your slip of the tongue when you were introducing me, when you said the learning factory, this book is about learning. So I know you study linguistics, and so you know that, you can find words or ways of saying what you really mean. And I think you meant it. And I'm glad you mentioned it that way, because this book is about learning. This book is about how organizations and their leaders learn about what they aspire for, and then learning how to work with people within their organizations, as partners within their organizations, and with maybe other stakeholders around, to collectively achieve what they aspire for. So they are journeys of learning, what do we really care about? What do we really want to achieve in our lives? And what is it that we need to learn to do to be able to achieve what we want to achieve? So as a consultant, I always found that these were the keys, helping people to listen to themselves. What is it you really care about? Why would you want to be struggling and slogging and working? What is the sense of satisfaction you're going to get out of all the slog if you don't know what you really care about? And then it can't be just your personal caring as the CEO. The people who are also slogging along with you, they must also be feeling that their lives are worth it. They are slogging for creating something that matters to them also. also. So learning about what others think about in your organizations, what they care about, and together learning what we as an organization care about, and then collectively saying what are the capabilities that each one of us may need to develop, or we collectively need to develop, like the ability to cooperate with each other so that we can together work more effectively to produce the results that we all now want to produce together. So it is about learning like. Now, I was targeting this book, like was asked to me in the beginning, to young consultants who, or potential consultants who come and ask me these questions. Some who say, should I join consulting? What is it about? And others who are already into consulting. And some are fairly senior people, I must say. They're partners of some of the firms that you've named, who've been my friends through, who have asked me, look, as a personal coach, can you give me an hour of your time, just off time? And during the pandemic, it's been easier to do that. So I want to talk to you about myself, about my life, and am I feeling satisfied? And I want to be effective in, as a consultant, can you talk to me? So this book is written for people who are in consulting. So that's why to call it a consultant's problem-solving handbook is the right thing. Now, a problem-solving handbook seems to suggest it's going to have, 10 tricks to solve 10 problems, right? So I liked it because people are going to say, hey, but where are the typical books written from management people and consultants are there are 10 things to do and how to do them in 10 minutes each. It's like what the book is about. So I like the title because then it's intriguing after that, like you said, that you read stories, real stories about people learning, organizations learning, leaders learning, the consultant myself learning also, and the young consultants working with me learning also. It's about learning together to produce things that we collectively want to produce. And the relationship between the consultant and the organization is the one that Dr. Batra has already reminded us of, that the consultant is not part of the team that is together going to be working to create their results. You are like a trusted advisor to them. You cannot be and should not be the executor of the results, the implementer of the results, because then you are actually taking away what they should be doing. Of course, in taking away what they're doing, you get paid for it. So your own income streams keep increasing, and the other organizations going to have to keep earning more to pay you more. So in some sense, you're overall weakening the organization. Certainly, you're weakening its growth and its sustainability by preventing it from doing the work itself.
Thank you for explaining that. Actually, I was also wondering that same thing, because you do put I was wondering about the structure of your book too, and not just the fact that you have all these short stories and they don't necessarily all go chronologically, because you've also added like stories about, you've added some poetry that you've written in there too. Where did those ideas come from? Like, what made you want to add those small anecdotes? Are those things that came in afterwards when you were like, okay, these are the lessons I want to sort of give to consultants, and I'm going to add these too? Or was it like more of a, cathartic process? Like while you were going through it, you kept adding these short stories?
Well, yes, actually the publisher made it easy for me to write this book, because the previous book, the same publisher, Penguin, the previous book in Learning Factory, they told me to write it in that style. So you're talking about, a time which was long ago for me, because that was when I was with Tatas in India until 1989, before I became a consultant. But some of the stories that I had been sharing as a consultant with my clients, or generally talking to young people and writing about it, are really like sort of timeless stories of leadership, of leaders in India helping people to together create enterprises that India would be proud about. But tell it as stories, don't give numbers and stuff. They're not books written about monetary contributions or the financial contributions, economic contributions of the Birla Group, the Tata Group, and so on. Just, the insights about how leaders make things happen. So write it as stories. And I found the reaction was very good, because many people read and said, we understand real life through stories. And that's universally true. You give me a spreadsheet of numbers, I really don't understand what the reality is and what you're trying to say. You tell me a story and I get it. So it was written as stories. So then the publisher said, hey, there's a second period of your life after you left Tata's for these 20 odd years. You're a consultant. Why don't you write your insights during that time also as stories? So I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So during the pandemic time, you see, we had time to write. So I was enjoying just reflecting on, and I made a, the list which kept growing about the number of incidents and stories during my consulting life, which I was recollecting now, and why. Why do I remember those? What was special about those situations? What did I learn out of those situations? And it comes from that. Because you remember occasions when you learn something, because that learn what you learned stays with you, and you recollect a great teacher, you recollect the way the great teacher brought you a lesson. All children remember that. So it came to me naturally that let's look for what I have learned when I learned it, and let me write about those situations and those stories. And I hope that therefore those stories will be more legible, more readable, and it was easier to write also.
Absolutely. I actually really like the fact that your lessons were also just like right under the heading of every chapter. You just had your lessons. Because I remember reading one of the chapters and I was like, where's the, because normally you expect that at the end. So this is the lesson of the story and this is what you learned, or this is what I learned. And I was like, oh no, it's already there. So people know exactly what they're going into, and they're going in for the experience. At least that's how I felt I was doing, when I was going in for the experience then, because if anyone wanted me to read through the lessons too, but it's really the story that's the crux of the book, and that's where the lesson like really kind of just hits home. And I'm sorry, I'm going off on my own little rant. There is a question at the end of this tunnel, but yeah, when you were going through that structure, was that structure also something you sort of did in your old book, or was this, even when you did in your old book, like what made you decide on this sort of Brechtian model of chapters?
Yeah, you're right. You see, if I have 20 stories, and in the previous book, I forget how many stories there were, but there are a couple of dozen stories. I mean, if you were to get a book with, 20 chapters and there's no connections amongst them, you would, to your point, not get what are the lessons here. So there are probably just 3 or 4 lessons, deeper lessons, life lessons in this book. So then the stories I found that I could be bunching them into these 4 or 5 categories, and each of those categories is about some lesson. And so that's right. So if I just open the book to say, what are those, the sub-chapters? First one is, who is a consultant? Right? It's about the first story. And the first chapter, or the first set of stories, is about, it's about purpose and ethics. Purpose and ethics. Then the second one comes into learning, what the Sabi were talking about, listening and systems thinking. And so many stories illustrate what learning is and how learning happens, and what listening is and how listening can be improved in the consultant and in the world. And what is systems thinking? So stories that illustrate something complex like systems thinking. And then the last set, which is creating a better world. That comes to, I feel all of us as human beings must help to create a better world around ourselves. Why? One is the ethical reason. Let's not be selfish and create only a world that suits us. The world must suit other people also. And then there is what I would say, a scientific reason. Unless the world around you is healthy and good, you cannot be remaining healthy and good. I think the pandemic has taught us this, that it's all very well that now you've got certain countries who have a large amount of money, who are then trying to vaccinate only their own people, and saying, then what is the world going to be like? We'll have to shut ourselves off, not let our people travel to other parts of the world where people are poor and don't have these vaccines, and they can't come to see us anymore. So this is going completely against this whole idea of globalization that started in the 1990s, that whole world is one, people can travel everywhere, and so on. And here we are.
Their ideas mix with cultures, get everything in there, get all the good out.
Yes. So I put these 20 stories into those 4 categories, and they're illustrating something deeper, each of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I also, just telling you all the parts I like of the book, one thing I also really like is how much you just like very plainly talk about other people and the lessons that they shared with you. And there was also the survey that you mentioned where young people kind of told had to do a survey, and it was presented, and they said something like they believe, like 80% or more people believe that the key business role is to develop societies, not profit. And it was a very nice anecdote to add in there. And it was like, because a lot of times when it's just also like a book that's giving you advice, you expect it to be very much about the person's perspective and their stories. But the stories are very much, there's a wide range where you're also talking about all these things, like just saying, there's a nice preface where you talk about, well, this is how it's changed, this is how the values have deteriorated, but also there are people now who really want to do better for the world. And we need to encourage that. And I think maybe this is just my perspective, like you're trying to say, well, it's already there. Let's make that happen.
I find that's a very important and interesting that you pointed out that story that I've reported about 80% of the management students around the world. And this was in a big, very well done international meeting in Cleveland at the Case Western University, which was, they had gathered the deans of the management schools from around the world. They've got an association of their own, and teachers of management around the world, their association, along with the UN Global Compact, which were companies, leading companies who wanted to change the way companies work so that they would also help to make the world better for everyone. So it was at that meeting. And so the participants in that conference were entirely students of management, as well as teachers and deans of management schools. So the survey was done by the management schools of their own students, and they said this, that they believe that the purpose of business should be to improve the world for everyone, and that they believe that corporations are not doing it, and that what they're taught in management schools doesn't help them to do it. Now, this is, I'm saying, this was in 2004 or 5, it's as far back as that. And so here we are, some 20 years later. What has changed really? The management schools continue to teach, or have been largely continue to teach the same things. Corporations have been even more focused on their bottom lines and shareholder valuations than the conditions of the environment and the society. But during this pandemic, I've been able to listen to so many young people in our country mostly, but outside also, who say, I want to learn how to help professionally the world to be better. So in the last 4 or 5 years since I left the Planning Commission, most of the young people that I'm coaching, being, let me say, a consultant to, or the organizations that I don't take money for anything, it's just because I care for it, are social organizations. And this is their dilemma, that the models of management that they are being taught by management consultants whose experiences entirely from the corporate world, and they bring these models to help these NGOs to become more efficient and to grow their own sizes, they feel instinctively is wrong. Instinctively is wrong. My point though is that there are so many people who are creating organizations to help the world be better for everyone. And they're looking for new ideas and new models. And so therefore in my book, I have brought out what must change in the corporate model itself, but more importantly, what is the new model which social organizations as well as corporate organizations need to adopt if they really want to contribute to make the world good for everyone.
And I think that's what the book also accomplishes really well. Like, it's presenting ideals and values, but it's not being idealistic. It's being very much realistic about what we can and cannot do, or not can and cannot do, but again, it's you're a consultant. This is lessons. We can take it the way we, and it can be adapted to any person, which is like why, again, I was like, I think this can go to a wider audience. I think a lot of people can benefit from reading this, because I myself was very surprised by it. Now, I also want to go to one point. You did mention like this part where you said, listen to those who are not like you. And I noticed that you have other books where you've said the same thing, either as a subheading or even as a title. Can you tell us about that a little bit? Like, why is this such a core lesson or core point that you're trying to make?
Yes, so I used the analogy of a doctor earlier, consultant as a doctor. What a good doctor does, a good general physician in particular, as you know, he will listen to you and say, you're feeling unwell. Where are you feeling unwell? When do you feel unwell? What is your view on why you're feeling unwell? They listen to you and they help you to articulate for the benefit of the diagnostic also, but even for yourself, to listen to yourself. This is like, borrowing your watch, as you said. to help you look at the time on your own watch. And therapists, of course, do this very well. I mean, that is their business, therapists.
That's actually what I was thinking about when I was reading. I was like, this sounds like a therapist.
Yes, but good therapy is that they call it non-directive counseling. It's non-directive. They don't tell you the solution, but they help you to listen to yourself and to figure out for yourself. Oh, now I know why I feel depressed. Yes, it's something I could do about it myself. Yes. Now I know why I'm feeling, for example, angry with somebody, and what is it I could do about it myself, and so on. So listening to another person is very, very essential if you want to be a good professional doctor, a good professional consultant, as well as, if I'm going to say, a good human being. Human beings must listen to other human beings if you want to have compassion for human beings. No human being is the same, and nor should they be. I don't insist that everyone should think like me. Let me learn from them. Maybe I might want to like to think like them. They got some way of thinking which helps me to feel more fulfilled myself. So listening to others and then helping others to listen to themselves. That's why listening is a very important skill, a discipline for any therapist, consultant, coach, doctor, to help another person to be able to help themselves. And I think this would be a universal discipline. It is not so. Today in the world, we are not listening to anybody. We are taught from school onwards to make our points more clearly. The best speaker gets the prizes. The best winner of a debate who can put down the other person's argument gets the prizes, not the person who listens to the other person's argument, say, why does this person believe this? I mean, his logic may be wrong, but there's a reason why this person so passionately continues to want to prove a point. What is this person's belief? What is the history of this person to make this person come to this belief? And in the world today, there's so much dissonance between people like us and people who are not like us. And social media is making it worse. In social media, because there's so many voices one can listen to because of the reach of social media, one is naturally compelled to, restrain oneself and stay with things that one can understand more easily. And the things that one can understand more easily are the same sort of things that one already knows. So one stays with groups of people who think like oneself. And of course, the algorithms of social media, in fact, make it easier for you to do that. They continue to force onto you or latch you into groups which you will be getting similar things. You'll be all buying the same sort of clothes, and which is good for advertising too, and box you into similar people. And thus the world is being broken up. And Rabindranath Tagore did say in his Gitanjali, he hoped that the world would be one in which it's not broken into fragments behind narrow domestic walls. And unfortunately, the world of public discourse is becoming a world which is broken up into fragments, each fragment behind its walls. We're not listening to each other. And we must break out of those walls and go and listen to people who don't think like us, not to put them down, but to understand them. And maybe then they'll give us the privilege of listening to us and understanding us. Thus we'll create harmony and new ideas.
I mean, of course, like the whole thing with social media started off with like you trying to find people who are similar to you, but not to stay there. It was like, find your crowd, find your comfort, but then also don't disconnect from everyone else. And that's very interesting how social media does that, like the very tool that, and that's with any technology, with any movement, any policy for that matter. Anytime you introduce it, you're also going to have a backlash or side effects, or it all comes together, right? And you can only navigate it. But you make a great point about, you focus so much on listening. Like you have a whole section about it in your book. You have books about that too. And I just thought it was very, very interesting because I was like, usually people would kind of, we all know communication is key, but you're not talking about communication. You're talking about listening and understanding. And that's what that whole section is about.
Communication. You are a linguist, right? The word communication, we promptly jump to the conclusion that communication is about communicating outwards. Our communication specialists are the people who can package our message and make it more clear and then deliver it to the people who need to hear it. But this is old Zen thing to say. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to listen, is there a sound? When the tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to listen, is there a sound? Communication has two sides to it. There's got to be a receiver of the communication. It can't be just a giver of communications. So a communication to be healthy and complete, both sides have to be built upon, the listening side and the speaking side. In the world today, we've built up too much the art of speaking well, writing well, arguing well, and hardly the art of calmly, patiently listening well. And that's why, yes, I did write that book called Listening for Well-Being, Conversation with People Not Like Ourselves, which His Holiness the Dalai Lama was kind enough to write the forward to, because he said this is the missing discipline in humanity today. And he said it's the first foundational discipline in Buddhism, because if you do not listen to people not like yourself, you can't have compassion for them because you don't understand them. And secondly, if you don't listen to people who have different sorts of ideas than yourself, you stop learning. And in his mind, the Buddhist discipline is both a very interrogative spiritual discipline. It's always inquiring into truth and reality. And also it's about compassion, as we well know. So the foundation for both compassion as well as, open-minded inquiry is listening to people not like yourself. And so this, of course, came to me later, but I was realizing in my work as a consultant, I was doing it instinctively, possibly. And that's why it comes out in the stories. And then I said, well, actually, this is an insight, an idea that I need to highlight. And that's why it became a title for a section of the book.
I think that was a really good addition. I really enjoyed reading those things. But like you said, there is a much bigger lesson there. And it can't be summed up with just one story, because it's a kind of lesson that you will keep having to learn over and over again through various experiences in your life. And once you were done with this book, I'm not trying. What did you like? How did you feel? Did you feel like how did that experience of putting this book together kind of influence you, or what did you learn through it?
I learned, I got a sense of satisfaction. I wrote that book, as I said, about the learning factory, which was about my time with Tata's many, many years ago. And writing that book, I began to feel that I'd had a good life. There were tough times and very, very tough times. But in retrospect, it was such a good life. It was a rich life. It was a learningful life with people who one learned so much from. And then when I wrote this book, it was more recent experiences, right? So it was requiring some reflection on also. Did I really learn something which was valuable, or I am trying to justify what I learned? Yeah, and especially since the book was targeted as actually trying to teach something to consultants, I had to be mindful that am I getting onto my soapbox now and trying to tell people what my beliefs are, but maybe my beliefs are not the only right beliefs. So it helped me to reflect on what I'd learned more sharply. Why am I saying this? Is it because I want people to think I'm very smart? Especially the world of consultants is a world of very smart people. So in my mind, I was always imagining who's reading this book. And I was saying there will be young consultants and there will be my peers, people who were my peers in the consulting business. And they're much younger than me, and so they're still there. What would they feel when they read this book? Yeah, and I could see. So I was therefore testing myself. Why am I writing it? Am I trying to convince somebody? It's like I saying to do one side of communication, trying to argue for my case, or am I learning something myself out of writing this book?
No, I think I also wanted to ask, because most of your books also seem to come at the end of sort of when you wrap up a project, when you finish a certain, well, I don't want to say era of your life, but a certain part that you are kind of, you write a book and it comes out. So is book writing something cathartic that you do that way? Is to be reflective of that time period, to put together everything you've learned and maybe pass that on?
Well, it would have to be anything that you do in life. If it's going to come out of your knowledge and experience, it would be related to some time period, it's related to your life. So if you're writing many books.
These are very specific, you have your
yes, I know. So you go down to exactly chunking it. Now, when you say my experience as a consultant, it's a specific period as my life. Yeah, I was officially a consultant since I left Tata's as being an executive. And I was a consultant. And I was a consultant until I was joining the Planning Commission. So I had those 20 years when I was officially a consultant. So I'm looking at that period in my life, and like you just said, stories during that period of my life. So yes, then I did write a book after I was finishing with the Planning Commission, which was asked again by another publisher. And there were two books actually, the same publisher, it was Rupa at that time, said one was about my learning about ideas. And that was not so much about what I learned in my stories in the Planning Commission, but ideas. So I wrote a book called Redesigning the Aeroplane While Flying. It was about how one...
That's also a really good title.
Yeah, how one reforms institutions. And in that book, the ideas that I put into that book were ideas I'd learned while I was a consultant the years before, as well as ideas that I had also learned in my earlier years with Tatas. And then what I'd learned now as a public policy person. So it was a book about ideas. Yeah, but compelled, the clarification of ideas was compelled by my being now in this unusual place in India, or being in a public policy space, which is a very complicated space. So one had to be, more thinking about what are the ideas that are guiding me and guiding us in the Planning Commission. Are they the right ideas or not? So it was a more intellectual book about ideas. But when I finished that, someone said, well, why don't you write a book about your time in the Planning Commission, about your experience of what you learned personally during that time? So I wrote this book called An Upstart in Government, and the subtitle was Journeys of Learning and Change, of change and learning. Again, learning comes in. And this life is about change. We're all changing. Willy-nilly, we don't even know how we're changing sometimes, but we're changing. And we want to make change in the world. And when we have to make change in the world, we have to take the world as it is. We also have to start with where we are. So in other words, we're flying in an aeroplane that's already there. So we are part of this aeroplane that is flying. And yet we want it to be a different aeroplane. Now, it's a dangerous thing to do. If you're flying in an aeroplane and you want to redesign it, you might crash it because you don't know the change that you're making, how it will affect the whole system as it's flying together. And this is the problem with, if I can say, expert consultants, including management consultants, that they think that by fixing one part of the system, you can make the whole system all right. So, fix the financial system of India and India will be all right for everybody. But the financial system is connected with the job system. It's connected with, if you will, the technology systems and so on. You can't have a policy just for finance. You can't have a policy just for technology. You can't have a policy just for infrastructure. All the policies must work together because in the aeroplane, they're all parts of the aeroplane, like the wings and the propellers. And
we're already in the air.
Yes, and with all these things, you can't just redesign the engines and think the plane is going to keep flying because the wings may not be able to support the thrust of the engines after that. So this was a change of thinking required, and I brought that out and again through stories, and it was about an upstart in government, which already been put rather intellectually, quite well, I think, in Redesigning the Aeroplane While Flying, that book about reforming institutions.
And you've also come up with 2 books this year as well, right? One of them is about listening to my mind, Zen-like diversions, which is also like, it sounds like your writing is becoming more and more about your thoughts and philosophy. I'm presuming here, but
this book is just poetry, poems.
Oh,
I have been my life through my times in Tatas, through my time as a consultant, through my time Planning Commission, through on. I reflect on my thoughts, and I like haiku poetry, because haiku poetry requires you to express a profound thought in 17 syllables. So it's an art of distilling the essence of an idea. And so it helps you also to be a good writer, because good writing is about finding the fewest number of words put together in the proper way so that you can explain a difficult idea. So haiku is a good discipline for a writer. So I've been writing haiku poetry, and my haiku poetries have been about my thoughts. So these poems are all there. So during the pandemic, again, I got a time to put together all the poems that were lying around on my computer or scraps of paper. And then, because nowadays one can publish the books online so well, finding a mainline publisher for a poetry book today is impossible. In fact, my agent said, he says, so who reads poetry nowadays? And no mainline publisher wants to publish a poetry book because they don't get a market out of it. But there are these online people, and if you want to do it, they will put it out very well. So that book that you're referring to is about my life. It's about my ideas, but put in poetry form. It's called, yes, Listening to My Mind. And it says below that Zen-like divergence. Zen is the Buddhist, Japanese, more Japanese, but Chinese also, Buddhist strain, which is about just being simple and listening to the water, listening to the birds, listening to yourself, and expressing your thoughts in 17 syllables. So that is that. But the other book I wrote, which is called A Billion Fireflies and Critical Conversations to Shape a New Post-Pandemic World, which Dr. Batra has already interviewed me about some months ago, was also produced online by the same Notion Press. And that was a collection of my ideas on policy and change, and what people had been saying they want to get accomplished once the pandemic is over, during all the webinars and all that I was attending. And what I was getting alarmed about when we went into the pandemic, the first few months, we were also alarmed about the poverty, inequality, and that, the financial system is very broken and the way we're making public policy is wrong. GDP should not be the measure. And I found, as we felt we were coming out of the pandemic before, the second and third wave fear started coming, people were talking about, oh, let's get the finance minister to, again, balance the budget. Let's get the finance minister to give more, deregulate the industries more so that there'll be more investment. I said, hey, wake up, guys. This is not what you wanted. So I put those things down into that book, but that was also done online very quickly. So as you can see that during the pandemic, I had plenty of time.
Yes, I can see that with all the publications that have come out.
5 books.
Lucky for us. My consultant has shown me the watch and told me that we have gone over time. And I have so many questions to ask you. But in the interest of time, I would like to wrap things up right now with my final question that I'd like to ask all the authors, which is, what is your favorite book and what are you reading right now?
I'm reading about 5 or 6 books right now, and I tend to do that because, there are many subjects that need to get connected. Okay, the 2 or 3 books that I'm reading, what I'm exploring through the 2 or 3 of them is the science of evolution. And there are now evolutionary biologists who claim that they know how the world works more than economists do, which is true, but more than physicists do, which is also true because physics doesn't try to explain society. So they say that we've got the sort of the master discipline, the explanation of everything. And I'm very intrigued about that because, as I've been saying, my whole journey has been trying to understand how people evolve, how institutions evolve, how societies evolve. And therefore, in this book, The Solutions Factory, there's a whole chapter about complex self-adaptive systems and how those ideas can apply to the business organizations. And so I'm very curious about evolution. So I'm reading about what evolutionary biologists say are the insights from evolutionary biology that economists should adopt, that business should adopt, and everybody should adopt. So that's the big set of books I'm reading now. I continue to read books on global economics and the change in the idea of economics, because I do feel that economics is needing to go through a paradigm shift, and there are new thinkers in economics who have been kept aside for the last 20 years because the celebrated paradigm of the business of business must be only business has been ruling economics, and sort of pure free trade ruling economics. But these people have been cautioning and saying, please don't adopt that so blindly because it won't be good for the world, as we're finding. So also picking up those authors, and they're saying more recently. So that's presently the set of books.
All right. Thank you so much for coming here today, Mr. Myra, and sharing the book with us and sharing your experiences as well and what books you're reading. I'm going to go check those out too. And thank you everyone who came in to watch this live, and anyone who missed anything, you can always go back and watch this on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, all those nice social platforms, except for TikTok. That was an old thing we realized. This was Mr. Myra, and his book is The Solution Factory, a consultant's handbook for problem solving. Although I feel anyone can read this and get something, gain something out of it. Thank you, Mr. Myra.
Thank you, Asudha. Thank you very much. And thanks to the Businessworld team. I just love your platform and the conversations. Thank you for inviting me.